moments. So yeah, we'll be starting very soon. There should be a poll popping up on your screen soon asking what do you see as the biggest challenge in meeting consumer expectation around sustainability and nutrition? Okay, we'll get started very soon. Thanks everyone for joining. For those of you that have just joined, there should be a poll for you to engage with whilst we're just waiting for a few more people to join. Okay, well, let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Innovation Forum webinar. I'm Ellen Nazir, part of the stakeholder engagement team here at Innovation Forum. And today we're looking at the relationship between consumers, food, nutrition, and sustainability. Consumer expectations around food are changing so fast, and they're reshaping how value is changing and being created across the entire sector. And there's some really compelling data on this. Three-quarters of Gen Z say that environmental impact influences their food decisions, and 84% of US consumers say that wellness is now a top priority. So what we're seeing is that nutrition, sustainability, health are no longer separate conversations. They're converging into a single commercial challenge for the food industry. But with that comes a lot of opportunity as well. So how are companies responding? Over the next hour, we'll be hearing from an expert panel on this, and we'll see what's working in ingredient sourcing, product design, and brand strategy. And we'll be looking at how you can meet both nutrition and sustainability expectations, not as a trade-off, but at scale. But before I turn to this excellent panel, audience really want you guys to be a part of the conversation. So please do leave your questions in the Q&A box. Where possible, do leave your name and company and get involved. Don't wait till the end. The sooner you ask your questions, the more likely we'll get to them. And before anyone asks, yes, this session is being recorded and we'll share the recording with everyone afterwards. So without further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce this great panel. We've got Alex Skidmore, Head of Market Intelligence Europe at Griffith Foods, Caroline Reed, Senior Sustainability Director at Oatly, and Dorothy Shaver, Global Food Sustainability Director at Unilever. Welcome to you all. So to set the scene, I'd really like to understand where consumers are at today, and I'd like to hear from each of you, how are you seeing consumer priorities around nutrition, sustainability and price shift and evolve? Alex, I'll turn to you first.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So, short answer, health and price have pulled ahead of sustainability. People say they care about the planet. I mean, it's an incredibly bad look to say anything else when you're asked that question. But when you're in the supermarket aisle or when you're stood in a restaurant looking at the menu board, you're not necessarily thinking that. At the time, it's what will taste great right this minute, what will make me feel better, and ultimately, can I afford it? So we've seen interest in sustainable living dip a little, particularly since the highs we saw in COVID. But conversely, our interest in health has continued to climb. But as painful as it is to say, with everything going on in the world at the moment, I think the cost of living is probably the biggest squeeze across all of those three.
And how are you seeing that? Do you see any sort of differences across the different markets you work across, Alex?
Yeah, of course. We definitely see different markets reacting slightly differently. Northwestern Europe, we see more convenience. We see that kind of driving or that need. If you go to South or Eastern Europe, it's more social, it's more local stories, more sourcing around that area. And there tends to be greater price sensitivity as well. But the biggest difference for us is more around generations. We see really big demographic differences between the likes of a Gen Z or what millennials are. When we look at this, the example I like to give is a 25-year-old in Barcelona has a lot more in common with a 25-year-old in Berlin than they do the 65-year-old neighbor next door.
Could you expand on a few of those sort of differences then with generations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, recently, I guess, as a business, we've done a really big piece of research around understanding consumer motivations, particularly in light of kind of different missions, and how those are influenced by things like value, by flavor, by nutrition, and indeed by sustainability. And what we really find is that it's not a one size fits all focus. You have to approach the four generations and their needs slightly differently. Gen Zs, millennials, Gen Xs, boomers have all had very different life experiences, and those drive very different food decisions, and they often operate under very different constraints as well. I think I'm
Thanks.
probably going to talk a bit,
No, please go on.
but I'll try and be brief. But if you think, for example, of the different generations, Gen Zs, late teens to sort of late 20s at the moment, they've never known a world that hasn't been in climate crisis or hasn't been in health crisis. They
Mm,
came of age during COVID, and for them, food in particular is a real key part of their identity. They prioritize sustainability, as you said at the start, and they also have a real big focus on their physical and their mental health. And a lot of this requires a food system rebuild, but they're also financially squeezed. They don't have the power in their wallets and they can't force that change. But they came of age watching Greta Thunberg. They've seen somebody their age shout down the UN, and they will absolutely use their voice to make or break a brand before it hits the shelf. If you think in the middle, where you have millennials and Gen X's, this is our most important purchasing block right now. And both of those generations feel financially squeezed in a different way. I'm a millennial. I was promised if I worked hard, I'd have a fantastic life. And I've watched that evaporate through back to back cost of living crises. Whereas Gen X's are generally struggling for aging parents or those pesky Gen Z kids that won't leave the house. And their retirement feels a very, very long way away. What this does is
mhm,
it makes us smart, it makes us cynical, but it makes us ultimately pragmatic. We don't have patience for pointless stories. We need products that pull our weight. So think about fermentation. It's good for gut health, but it can also make a product stay fresh for longer in my fridge. I'll pay a modest premium, but the product, and I do care about sustainability, and so do most of the Gen X's and millennials, but it has to really solve my real daily problem. It's got to earn its place on the table. And then if you think about boomers, so our 60s to almost 80, often written off for not caring, but globally the data is a lot more nuanced. They recycle,
mhm.
they cut food waste, they use up leftovers, they often over-index on local, seasonal, and they buy more organic than anybody else. But they don't do these things for a love of the planet. They do it because the food tastes how it used to taste in their minds. It's associated with quality, and it's also associated with meeting their nutritional concerns as they age. They also have the time and the money. They just need a very different story. So I guess when we talk about the different generations, it's all about tensions. Gen Z have the greatest will, but the least cash. Boomers hold the wallets. And the millennials and Gen X's that really decide what scales want it to be convenient and practical. So innovation is one that kind of finds where all of these genuinely overlap and actually make the product better as opposed to having to make a compromise.
Thanks, Alex. I mean that, yeah, so interesting and so much to come back to there. Um, Caroline, I think this ties in really well with Oatly's story. You know, Gen Z, they've always grown up, as Alex really made a fantastic point there, in a climate conscious world. So how have you and Oatly overall seen consumer expectations grow and evolve?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I learned so much from what Alex shared. When it comes to Oatly, if we look at Oatly's consumers today based on research, at least more than 50% of Oatly consumers choose Oatly today because of nutrition and sustainability as main drivers, though they're today's consumers and we need to reach more of the many. So from an Oatly perspective, I mean, you could say that we have products that tick all the boxes of what the different generations and different people are looking for. I mean, we know that the majority of people choose food at that moment in time when they're making the purchasing choice based on how it tastes, and so we really focus on taste and innovation for amazing tasting products. But then they also have the co-benefits, right? So it has our majority of our drinks are fortified. They have the nutrition and nutrients that people need. Also, oats and Oatly are a source of fiber, and it's becoming much more prevalent in mainstream that people want more fiber and need more fiber, and there's such a fiber gap. So we have the nutritional profile, and then also Oatly, our products are climate solutions. They're significantly less impactful than the status quo, the cow's milk, which we're really trying to replace. So you could say from that perspective that irrespective of what drives you to choose a food. We hope we have the co-benefits and really can deliver to it taste, nutrition and sustainability. I think what we want to highlight though, of course, is that the barriers we have and we see are more from the kind of unlevel playing field of like policy and VAT, subsidies. So we're not necessarily seeing price parity between sort of the incumbents and the status quo, and there's the foods that need to scale and replace them from a climate solution perspective. And then we're also seeing a lot of misinformation. You could say that the industries that we wish to replace with more climate solutions are of course fighting back, and there is a lot of misinformation out there that is also influencing consumers.
Yeah, definitely a lot to say on the misinformation there. I mean, how much do you feel like you're still trying to convince people that, there are these incredible benefits to Oatly's drinks? Do you still feel like that's a challenge, or do you feel like you have built that trust now with consumers?
I think for the majority of consumers, we have the trust. Of course, there's always going to be misinformation that people believe, but for us, it's about being as transparent as possible, grounded in science, but also leaning in on what are the drivers and what makes people want to try something. Because I think trial is what gets people to really maybe possibly try something new and change that behavior, or maybe expand into more plant-rich diets. And so that's why we're really leaning on taste and amazing taste, focusing on that, and then just kind of having that communication around the co-benefits over time.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Well, as a big Oatly drinker, I can say the taste is a big factor for me. And Dorothy, I'd love to turn to you now and just ask the same question again. How are you seeing these different priorities and expectations evolving at Unilever?
Sure. So, thank you for having me. First of all, of course, I work for Unilever. So, those of you who don't know, our two largest brands are, of course, Knorr or Knorr, depending on how you say it, and Hellmann's. And we, of course, have really large legacy brands. So, our approach has to be a little bit different than some of these smaller brands. There's a couple of statistics that I recently saw that are quite interesting. One is that 78% of US consumers say that health and nutrition are a priority when making food choices. This is according to Eat Well Global's information and the research that they've done, which is quite extensive. It also means that that's up 20% than just a few years ago. So I think there is a major rise across all generations, actually, in the connection between, of course, the food choices that they make and their own personal health. And as a registered dietitian by background, that's music to my ears. Of course, in Unilever, I lead sustainability, and there are multiple shifts that need to be taken into account as we look at our future in the world of food in a big company. Now, the food world is changing really faster than ever. We have to take into account ideology, regulation, consumer expectations, stakeholder priorities, and all of those are very much converging. We're also really seeing a massive external movement to really integrate sustainability and nutrition. This is really seen through big reports such as the 2025 Eat Lancet report, and also is also coming through a little bit in the MAHA movement, which of course is the Make America Healthy Again movement that's happening, and also beyond. We're seeing it happen with some of our smaller brands that are in the store, and also across the larger brands. It's that integration between really what's better for me and what's better for the planet. Understanding that better for me is very much higher on the priority list, as has already been said today. So we really have to take a look as legacy brands on what it is that we need to do. From a strategic perspective, we really see this as really focusing on three critical areas across our large and our small brands, across all of our markets, which of course are basically across the entire world. I'll share our key markets in just a minute. But really focusing in on three critical pillars when it comes to our strategy around really improving the way that we grow our ingredients for resilience within our own supply chain, and also to, of course, reduce the amount of resources that we're utilizing. So that means really focusing in on scaling sustainable and regenerative practices across our supply chain. The second one is really improving positive nutrition, understanding that's a real proposition for consumers. And as brands that really are accompaniments to meals, such as seasonings and sauces and adding flavors, we really have a major opportunity to be flexible in the tips and the tricks and the recipes that we provide, and also the innovations and the renovations that we have within our pipeline to make sure that we are staying really current with the growing consumer needs around health. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to change our products, which of course we constantly are to make them better for people and better for the planet. But we also can help people to eat better at home and also out of home, because we also have a food solutions, a food service operation that we run as well. So we combined those two pillars together with, of course, packaging. And what we're also seeing amongst Gen Z, and I'll share some of the research that we did, is that packaging is the number one way that people really see a brand come to life, right? You see it on a package, you like the colors, it comes across as kind of natural, it comes across as better for me. And that's really the way that that packaging looks. We also need to make sure that we have the reason to believe behind that, as big brands are specifically being very much scrutinized against when it comes to misinformation or not really having the facts behind what they're saying. We always make sure we have that through a website, through a claim, through, other information that you can potentially get around what we're doing behind what we're saying on that pack. And it's really about making sure that you are really tied up on that reason to believe, making sure that you're certified, making sure that you have the right materials in your packaging, and you're being really, really transparent. And we recently did a piece of work about these three pillars to really see how do we articulate this in our legacy brands across the world. So between October of last year and January of this year, we did 2 phases of work across the Gen Z population. And why did we focus on the Gen Z population? Well, it's about 1/3 of the global population. And as was said earlier, it's really about making sure that we are winning with the critical population groups across the world. And this is the critical generation. It is 1/3 of the population. It also has 360 billion USD of spending power. That's absolutely enormous. What we also found when we looked a little bit more into Gen Z is actually they're not just influencing with their own population group, they're influencing above and also below. So when you're working with somebody in the Gen Z group, they're potentially really influencing who they're working with when it comes to food choices. So they really have a lot of power when it comes to their influence across the whole food world. So we looked at it across a variety of different markets in India, UK, US, Germany, Hungary, and India. So pretty widespread when it comes to kind of a global view, also very much focused on the markets that we really hone in on in our brands. We did a few things. We looked across the social media, of course, when it comes to Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat. We also had a quantitative study with 1,500 people that was specifically in US, Germany, and China. And we also had a variety of different kind of workshops paired with quantitative study at the same time across a variety of different markets. So it was focused on really getting insights from this cohort around what they care about when it comes to how we grow, what we provide, and how we package. And these findings are very much aligned with what we've said so far, but I'm happy to share just a couple of them to give you a hint on this large piece of research that we did with this very important cohort. So I think one of the key differences is that Gen Z really wants something that's specifically for them. And 73% say that they actually consume food for energy, and 61 for mental well-being. So that means that food products need to provide them with a benefit behind not just, just healthier for you, but they need to have another kind of functional benefit behind that. So making sure that we have the right nutrients in that product and or the whole recipe or dish itself, and to really say, this really can back up providing you with a functional benefit such as energy or mental well-being. So I think that's a challenge for some of us to justify that when it comes to a product and or a meal, but that's a real space that's being looked into. They also really expect visible sustainability. So that means that they want to be able to see and very quickly understand what you're doing to make sure that the food's grown in the right way, that the people behind the food are treated in the right way, and making sure that it's packaged in a way that will not harm. So these are two of the critical things that we need to look at. I have a lot more that I'll share as we go, but I think just to share a few things, I think really integrating sustainability and nutrition is absolutely critical for all of us to really look into as we go forward. We won't be able to have healthy food if we don't grow food in the right ways, in the right places, and in the right amounts, and making sure that we have farmers. And I think the other one is really making sure that we are taking into account what consumers are asking of us. And they're asking more than just general health. They're asking for functional benefits, they're asking for transparency, and they're asking to really feel like they belong to that brand.
Thanks, Dorothy. Some, yeah, really amazing insights, and it sounds like such a compelling piece of research. The way you define sort of what good food means for Gen Z being, having that mental well-being element as well as the nutrition, how does that definition of good food differ to what you've previously been used to with other generations at Unilever or other focuses in the past?
Well, I think based on the insights, I think the big difference is really that the high percentage of this cohort across the world that's really looking for food that's better for them. That's one big one is the percentage. So I think that's a big difference, is a higher percentage of I want something that's better for me. I think the second one is the transparency factor. So this generation's really looking for being very clear on what went into that product, what are the ingredients, what are the benefits, what are the nutrients, what's the packaging, what was the transport behind it, who were the people behind it. And I think that that's really something that's quite different. It's really that level of transparency and consciousness that's coming through. And I'd argue that maybe in the past we called it quote, quote, sustainability. So in a lot of these conversations, we're saying that sustainability is fading away and health is rising to the top. But I would actually say that it's consciousness. And consciousness actually takes into account both of those pillars. And maybe we need a new word for the word sustainability, in my opinion. But as we think about consciousness and we think about this very important cohort who is going to really lead food choices and the way that food grows when it comes to companies in the future, we do have to take into account, if you're going to be more conscious, then we need to have more transparency. We need to make sure that any ingredients that, whether it's, scrutiny for scientific reasons or scrutiny for ideology reasons, we need to make sure that we have the right ingredients in our products as we go forward if this conscious consumer is going to be the main one who's purchasing our brands. And as a legacy brand, which is what, of course, a lot of the brands are in Unilever, really long time big brands across the world, we have to make sure that the way that we are perceived is that we are aware of health and we are aware of our impact on the planet. And that's making sure that the work that we're doing, the words that we're choosing, the people that are in our advertisements and our social media, and the way that we're coming across as almost like system one perspective needs to make sure that we are aware of what this cohort cares about, and also that we really have really, really conscious brands. And I think those are really shifts that we need to really watch out for as we go forward to make sure that we can continue to grow in our key markets.
Absolutely. And I think the points you made there really tie back to what Alex was saying at the beginning as well, that the Gen Z have always lived with a climate crisis going on. So perhaps these individual decisions are how they feel that they can gain control over the situation. So much to come back to there. Just want to say, audience, please do keep your questions coming in. It's great to see you asking them already. I'd now like to turn a bit to, now that we've addressed where consumers are at, figuring out how we can respond to this and see it as an opportunity. So, Alex, I'd love to understand from sort of the ingredients and B2B lens, how does the sustainability story get built into the supply chain when, consumers may not see it in the same way that these B2C brands are experiencing?
I'll start with one point. Ultimately, the impact is real whether somebody looks for the story or not. The most important thing here is having that impact. So even if all of the work that we do is completely invisible to the end consumer, it's absolutely fine because we know that we've done the right thing throughout all the stages of the process. And being the kind of food ingredients operator, we don't have the same consumer touch point that both Dorothy and Caroline are able to work from. But conversely, 75, 80% of sustainable impact when it comes to food actually lives very much upstream. It's in agriculture, it's in sourcing, land management, even down to kind of stakeholder and growers, human rights, etc. And that's really fundamental to where we operate. And we don't need to be on the back of the pack to matter. What we need to do is ensure we can support verification that's robust enough should a brand want to make a claim, or should a retailer need to make an ESG commitment. We have to be absolutely capable of ensuring that that proof holds up. Because as Dorothy mentioned, and I think you mentioned as well, Ellen, Gen Z will fact check it. We've seen plenty of stories around fake news and all of those claims. They will absolutely, within 60 seconds, have told you whether your claim is right or wrong. Regulators are tightening, and greenwashing stories travel incredibly fast. They will explode through TikTok in moments. For our perspective, we operate through what our platform called Tarova, and that enables us to have things such as traceable, Rainforest Alliance certified or other sustainability certified ingredients. They're grown by smallholder families all across Asia, Africa, Latin America. So we have absolute transparency from seeds through to seasoning, and all of the benefits that you can associate for this, sort of reduced CO2, improved climate resilience, real improved livelihoods, benefits that are actual tangible, as opposed to things that are just added on at the marketing stage. So, for example, if our customers want to tell a story, for Gen Z, we can have a QR code on pack, goes straight back to the farm. The proof that they've been demanding, the reason for them to share. Millennials, they have a clean label, they have something that's got a strong formulation story, nothing to hide, no additives, multiple benefits all in one place. For boomers, quality signal, certified, origin, a picture of a farmer and a farm that they can name. It's not abstract sustainability. It's what good food used to be to them when they were growing up. They still believe that food came from the farm at the end of their road, so we can give them that. We can give them that view as well. You know, back to when before life got so very, very complicated. So the difference between sustainability as a kind of marketing layer and sustainability as absolute fact, because one will invite scrutiny and the other one will survive it. So for us, it's all about ensuring that we're there should consumers want to see it, and when they do, that we've got tools in place to make sure it's robust.
Thanks, Alex. I mean, it's so interesting what you're saying about having sort of the picture of the farm that, Gen X can relate to, and then sort of the QR codes for the younger generations. How do you balance having all of those different requirements?
Honestly, I think it's about ensuring that we don't treat it all as incredibly separate benefits that are competing for label space. I'm sure everyone in this call who's engaged with a retailer has tried to get something on a label and been told there's only space for one or two claims. What you have to do is converge these into one decision, because then that kind of barrier really, really disappears. So, for example, if we eat sustainably, in theory, it will be a more healthy diet. That theory will become should become cheaper. So in terms of this, I would say if we continue to treat them as separate, then we're just creating a problem or a headache for ourselves.
Yeah, makes sense having it cohesive, holistic. Caroline, I'd love to turn to you and figure out, from Oatly's perspective, how you're using, brand innovation here.
Yeah. So I think I agree with everything Alex has just said. And of course, all companies need to be exceptionally credible in doing the work. It can't just be nice words. You need to scratch the surface. You need to understand what is the actual impact and progress being had in the supply chains. And we take that seriously, Oatly, with things like regenerative agriculture and scaling that. But I think what we also see is that today's consumers, they love experiences. They're influenced hugely by social media, and they live on social media. And so from a sort of brand innovation perspective, Oatly's kind of moved from being the activist, David to the Goliath, challenger to the milk industry. And we are all those things still. The biggest impact we can have as a company from a planetary perspective is converting people from cow's milk to Oatly, significantly less emissions, like 50% or more. But to reach more consumers and to make people feel inspired and engaged, we've done stuff, and I'm actually going to hold this up. This is really ghetto. It's actually something that's printed, but this is just one page from the Oatly lookbook. And about a year ago, we started to really kind of explore what are kind of signature drinks and bespoke drinks, and really personalizing your moments of indulgence and enjoyment throughout the day, and how can Oatly play a role in that and be a base. And it's not about the communication, is not about sustainability nor health and nutrition, but more just those really indulgent, exciting, colorful moments that you can share on social media and that are amazing. And then again, like I was saying, but then the co-benefits behind it are that you also are buying a climate solution product that is so significantly less impactful than dairy, and it has the nutrients you need. So that's kind of the shift and the approach we've been taking recently with Oatly, which seems to be really resonating, and we're seeing the category really start to take off and grow again. And we need to speak and reach different consumers in different ways, because it's interesting. I mean, we speak about these different generations, but even within generations, we have a huge wide variety of people that are looking for totally different things. And we need to reach people that want to just have real fun with their food, all the way to people that really want to scan that QR code and know exactly. I mean, from our perspective, we put the product climate footprint on pack and really like transparently show, if you really want to get into the details, what is the impact of every single part of our supply chain. And we need to like meet all those different wishes and desires.
Yeah, I love the way you're sort of approaching it with excitement. And I must admit, my colleagues in the room who are Gen Z, their eyes lit up when they saw the matcha on the screen. So it's definitely resonating. Are you seeing then that excitement and individual enjoyment is a sort of a key factor then, and sustainability is sort of a given for consumers? Is that sort of how you're approaching it?
Yeah, I don't think it's a given, but definitely like, well, the thing is, if you look into research, a lot of the reasons why barriers for people to try plant-based foods generally is the perception it's going to taste bad. And so to get over that barrier, we want to do it through that excitement, through that color, through that deliciousness and trial. And once you've tried it once and you think, wow, this is actually amazing, and actually matcha with Oatly is actually tastes far nicer than perhaps some matcha with cow's milk, then you're maybe more open to explore and try the different products and bring it more into your day to day. And I think that's when you start to say, okay, I've started trying this because of taste and consuming this, but now I'm starting to learn that actually this is also beneficial for the planet. Actually, this is pretty beneficial for my health with the additional fiber, etc. So it's a kind of, whichever door you come in to why you start to try plant-based, then you're able to enjoy all the benefits of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we touched on sort of the importance of certifications and, you know, people being able to check the facts behind it. We've touched on the excitement, the sort of pleasure out those small moments of enjoyment. Dorothy, I wonder if you've got anything to add here. You know, how is Unilever responding to the amazing research findings that you've done?
Well, a lot of the research findings actually have already been put into our renovation and innovation pipeline when it comes to the products. I think it's more about how we're promoting our products that needs to kind of shift. And I think that's really something that Alex touched on as well, is really, you know, we need to do everything we can to make sure that we can have a resilient supply chain to support the ingredients that we need within our products. And that's becoming harder and harder as a result of unexpected climate change. I actually just went to see a farmer this weekend, and he used to work actually as a financier in Paris. And he, you know, just for fun, got this farm. And he said, I was sure that within my lifetime, I would not have to deal with the impacts of climate change. So I think that you know, when it comes to the question you asked Alex in relation to, you know, why are you doing what you're doing in your supply chain, even if, you know, consumers aren't going to see it? It's that they are going to see it, would be my answer, is that they are going to be able to see that they have your product on the shelf in times of, for example, drought in Spain. They're going to be able to have tomatoes because, you know, they integrated drip irrigation in the supply chain. They reuse water. They use the rainwater whenever the rain does come. And so those types of things are things that people are going to see. I think the other piece is really, you know, a few years ago, I don't know if you guys all did this in your companies, or if you saw it, we really believed in QR codes. So we were doing a lot of work to get information in through our QR codes to tell stories and all these things. And we actually realized that people weren't looking at QR codes. Well, as a result of this work, we found that Gen Z really does distrust vague claims, and 2/3 are disengaging when sustainability messaging feels exaggerated. And 8 and 10 are really looking at authenticity around sourcing claims. That goes into the place, the way, the people. And actually, UK is a huge market for a lot of us, of course. In the UK in particular, 75% is a huge amount of this group that we looked at, of this cohort, are scanning QR codes to find out more about products. Now, that's huge. So that gives a real opportunity for a little bit more storytelling beyond just is whatever is on front of pack. So I wanted to bring that one up. I think the other one that was mentioned by Caroline is really around this whole idea of experience. And we did some work for our food solutions side, which is Unilever Food Solutions is our operation side. So we sell to restaurants and we sell to catering and things like this around the world. And really, 7 in 10 expect dining to feel like a reward. And 65% feel that it has become more expensive. And in order for them to make that move to go out of home to eat, they really need to have an experience. They need to feel like it's interesting, it's Instagrammable, it's something they can tell their friends about. And that's what really makes it worth it to them. And I think that it's up to us to really make those experiences, not just engage them on the flavor level, which of course remains number one, no matter what, but engage them beyond that, engage their minds, engage their hearts to teach them a little bit more about where their food comes from. Not like a finger pointing, but more of a storytelling around who grew it, where it was grown, how it came to life, what it is going to do for your body from a nutrient perspective and also a functional perspective. And I think there's real opportunity in that for those of us who also work in the out of home experience. I think the third one that I was going to touch upon is really on that kind of system one feeling of food. And I think what we need to realize as brands, big, small, and in between, is that people choose foods based on the way they make them feel when they see them, and particularly for Gen Z, the way that it relates to who they are. So, of course, the ingredients on back of pack matter. Of course, the check and the letter and whatever kind of regulatory piece that's coming up, we need to make sure we have all of those checks and balances. But in addition to that, I think we need to take a closer look at what colors, what words, what designs make this very important cohort of Gen Z really understand that this is a conscious brand and this is something that you can believe in. And I think that there's more work for all of us to actually do in that. There's one thing to, of course, clean up your back of pack, make sure that you have the best ingredients in there as possible. Of course, clean up your front of pack. But even more than that, how can you make sure that when you're on that shelf, that you're coming across as really a conscious brand that relates to this group? And I think there's more to be done in that. So I think there's really good news that there's an opportunity for storytelling through the QR codes. I think it's also really good news that, when people go out of home, they want an experience, and that provides an opportunity to give them more than just really delicious, fabulous, nourishing food. And I think there's a real opportunity to make sure that system one comes across, that these brands are really conscious, because that's what's really being one when it comes to the growth of the smaller brands. So there's 80% of the growth in foods in the retail space is coming from brands that are better for people and better for the planet in that kind of conscious space is what I'd like to call it. And they're really the ones that are rising to the top. It's where most of the growth is coming from. So that's an opportunity for all of us to do the things that make us better, and also make sure that we're doing the extra work to making sure that we are perceived as that. So it does drive growth of the better foods.
Thanks, Dorothy. I can't believe that 75% use QR codes. That's
I couldn't
really,
either. I
that's
was like,
really
what are they
blowing my
doing with their
mind.
time? How do they have that time?
Yeah, that's definitely a big takeaway for me. So I mean, you've spoken there about opportunity being, conscious brands for conscious consumers and sort of building that brand loyalty and how consumers will then sort of trust that brand. I wonder, Caroline and Alex, if I could turn to you both and say, what do you see as the biggest opportunity in this space? Caroline, I'll turn to you first.
Shall I go first? What is the biggest opportunity in this space when it comes to not QR codes? I kind of want to hear. You mean in the space of this kind of intersection of sustainability and nutrition
Yeah, and just how you can turn this into an opportunity. What do you think
yeah.
you'll be looking to evolve over the next 3 to 5 years, and what could other brands be looking to do
Yeah.
over the
I
next three to
mean,
five?
yeah. Like I said, I mean, I think from Oatly's perspective, I mean, we have the sort of products there. I mean, it tastes amazing. You can do super cool experience with it. And we are very credible when it comes to sustainability and nutrition too. But I would say actually the opportunity is that we've been reflecting a lot on the kind of the 80 to 9%. 8 to 9% of the world's population say they do want climate action. They want governments to take more climate action. And I think here there is a space for brands to really step up and speak more and use their voice. So actually beyond having amazing products out there in our product portfolio and just kind of driving Instagram moments, as Dorothy said, I think as a brand, we need to demonstrate that we mean business when we're talking about food system transformation and climate action, and we want to actually use our voice and be vocal. And I think that's the biggest opportunity for all of our companies, is not to be quiet and not to step back, and not only to meet kind of the consumers where we think they are their priority is mostly at this moment in time, because also 89% of the world's population wants more climate action, and it's not polarized and it's not political. And so I actually think that's also another space. And we heard, Alex, you mentioned earlier, I mean, the generation, the Gen Z, they will boycott a brand very, very quickly if they don't believe what they they're doing, what they stand for. And I think at the same time, they will really reward companies that really take that extra mile. So I think it's like, yes, let's do less, reduce our impact in our supply chains. Let's build resilience, regenerative supply chains. Let's have amazing products on the shelves, and let's also use our voice and our brands and our narratives to actually contribute to the greater good, and to really, inspire climate action far beyond our own company walls.
Thanks, Caroline. Yeah, over to you, Alex.
Wow, I don't know how I follow that, Caroline. That was inspirational. So I guess in terms of the role me and my team play, we really have to try and understand what the next 5, 10 years looks like, because we're the starting point for where we ought to be prioritizing innovation. So I'm probably going to upset some boomers on the call or even on the webinar first, but I will bring it back around, so stay with me. For us, in terms of this space, I would say one of the biggest opportunities in kind of the next 5 years or so is the great wealth transfer and Gen Alpha. So globally, anywhere up to 100 trillion US dollars is expected to pass from boomers to millennials in the next 10 years. So apologies for any boomers, I've just given a visualization of your immortality. But what we will find is that when this occurs, for the first time, an openly sustainability focused generation will have the means to afford and demand it at scale. And then a fifth generation that we've not really touched on yet, but Gen Alpha. And Gen Alpha is everyone under about 13 to 14 at the moment, and they are essentially Gen Z on steroids. These are kids that are already heavily influencing the household purchases of their millennial parents. And for these guys, sustainability isn't, or personalized nutrition or nutritious products that speak to them are not premium add-ons, they're absolute defaults. So in the next sort of 5 to 10 years, we're going to have a very different consumer dynamic that's going to expect a lot of this as a default, but crucially ought to have the means to be able to pay for it. And then conversely, if boomers continue to live, there will be a bigger and bigger and bigger push on functional, personal, aged, elderly-like nutrition, which will need a whole lot of solutions that, again, these sort of areas can fix. So depending on what happens in the next 5 to 10 years, there are opportunities at both ends of the spectrum.
And watch out for Gen Alpha in the next 5 to 10 years. Okay, audience questions. There's one from Carlotta on, when it comes to nutrition, do you see big differences across world regions? Are US citizens interested in different aspects of their food in comparison to Europeans? Alex, we touched on that at the start, so I wonder if I can turn to perhaps Dorothy. if you have found any sort of differences there in regional consumers.
A bit. I mean, the work that we've done on Gen Z and also beyond that, there are some differences, and it isn't as large as you'd think, is what I would say. Unfortunately, vegetables are not gaining popularity, regardless of the fact that I personally, of course, think that they should, and they're not gaining popularity in any market across Gen Z, unfortunately, which is really interesting, understanding that functionally they provide quite a bit when it comes to nutrients per calorie. But what we have seen is that the protein trend is going pretty strong across all the markets, and the difference is in the sources of protein. So we are finding that particularly across the United States and in Europe, chicken is growing in popularity, and happily. In other markets such as India and in Brazil, then also fiber is growing and in popularity. And of course, India has a high population of people who don't eat meat, in particular chicken. So beans are growing for the source of protein. So I wouldn't say that it's from the kind of the macro level. It's very much around protein. It's very much around functionality, and there are a lot of similarities across. But the individual foods, of course, are extremely cultural and extremely regional. And we have to take that into account as we go forward to really activate these trends. So there's a bit of deeper dive that needs to happen when you go into the individual markets. But the starting point remains really the same. It's functional, it's protein, it's gut health. It's really looking at those spaces. And then the ingredients underneath are a bit different. So that does differ quite a bit. The other thing that differs and really does differ in the way that they make their choices is where they get their information from. So the key sources of information is different across the markets. And although, of course, the saturation happens in the integration of information as a result of social media platforms and news platforms, the information that is gathered in the retail space and in the operator space, such on a menu, is actually higher when you are really in the face of it in China, Brazil, and India than it is in the United States and Europe. And in Gen Z, we're finding that in the United States, UK, and Europe, a lot of that information is found on websites, on digging a little bit deeper, on doing some research, while in those other markets I mentioned, it's a little bit more in the retail space and in the operations. So that differs in where the opportunity is on how you tell your story.
Thanks, Dorothy. And yeah, I saw in the McKinsey report on sort of Gen Z consumer that protein was a big buzzword now.
Huge.
So yeah, it's really seeing how that's evolving, and I'm sure we're all seeing that on our own social media. Caroline, there's a question here about how companies scale investments in sustainability and regenerative agriculture, and how is the planet side of the equation becoming a bigger internal priority? I wonder if you have any thoughts there.
How do we scale investments? It's a great question. Speaking specifically about Oatly and how we do things, we updated our sustainability strategy and launched it last year. And together with that, coupled to that, when it went up to our board for approval, was an investment plan that highlighted specifically how many dollars need to be invested to deliver to those targets and those ambitions. So I think a kind of a starting point from a corporate company perspective is make sure that the ambitions are coupled with a very clear investment plan, which goes together for approval. I think when it comes to scaling regenerative agriculture and those kind of things, I mean, obviously companies, we have regenerative agricultural programs. We incentivize farmers for implementing regenerative practices on farm. And companies can only do so much. So I think it's about coming together in collaborations, especially from a kind of agriculture perspective. We buy oats, but farmers grow in rotation. Other crops are grown. So how can we find partners to partner with, so we can kind of scale regenerative agriculture on farms more quickly together, such as like in Sweden. This year we've actually collaborated with Polar Bread. It's a very traditional, I think, 100-year-old company making bread. So they buy a lot of wheat. So how we've come together to say, okay, together with our millers, let's scale this more quickly by pulling together the finances. But we also need to acknowledge that we need to see a major shift in major reform in agricultural policy to really support the transition to much more plant-centric production, regenerative production. Right now, our agricultural policies aren't really aligned at all with producing food within the planetary boundaries as we go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to hear about those initiatives. Sounds really exciting. But yeah, definitely, as you say, a need for alignment on policies there. Alex, there's a question about consumer expectations around sustainability growing. How do you see water as part of the transparency conversation there? Not just usage, but where it's being sourced. That's a great question. That's from Emma. Wonder if you'd like to take a stab at that one.
Yeah, I think look, it's an incredibly important question. And whilst I'm possibly not the best sustainability expert to answer this one, I can certainly come at it from a consumer perspective. And I would say that water for me is on a similar trajectory to where carbon was 15 years ago. Not entirely mainstream in the consumer consciousness, but the infrastructure of accountability is absolutely being built around it. And that's whether or not consumers are asking for it. Right now, I'd say that most consumers don't really engage with water at the very most visible end. They see plastic bottles, they kind of see water waste, but generally they see things like drought headlines that exist on the other side of the world. The deeper question around sort of where agricultural water comes from or how it's used in farming or how it's used in processing, it's relatively invisible. So I think as we see more and more climate events happening and bringing more and more attention to water scarcity, and as it becomes a little bit more visible, particularly in extreme weather in Europe and in the US. I mean, so I live in Spain, we've seen that in the last 12 months or so, that there has been long scarcity and then a huge over delivery of water. So I would say at the moment in time, it's not something that is fundamentally right at the front of consumers' mindsets. I think over the next 5 to 10 years it will be, but that could really accelerate if we continue to see the sort of weather extremes that we're currently seeing right now. And that will absolutely put scrutiny on. As both Dorothy and Caroline mentioned, if 3 in 4 Gen Zs are using QR codes, and I would also add that QR codes are powerful, but social media conversation, what someone says on TikTok that gets picks up on somebody else's TikTok and then makes its way down through Twitter, X, Instagram, and eventually to Facebook, all of that will also continue to drive as well. So I think that water scarcity, water management is absolutely something that brands need to be aware of and thinking on, because it's going to come at some point. And I would say it's probably 5 to 10 years before it hits the real mainstream.
Okay, yeah, good key takeaway there. Be prepared to consider water as a top priority. There's a good question here from Elizabeth Isaac on how to approach engaging with your suppliers, especially your small business suppliers and your supply chains. You know, majority of companies' emissions are scope 3. So, Dorothy, I wonder if you could speak to that, being such on a global scale. How are you engaging suppliers on this topic?
Sure. So we have a strong strategy around our supplier climate program, also around the implementation of our sustainable agriculture principles and our regenerative agriculture principles. And it is very true that most of our emissions do come from our suppliers when it comes to scope 3. So when you look at, a lot of the company goals, we have a goal to reduce our carbon footprint by 30% by 2030. And in order to get there, we have to have really strong partnerships with our suppliers because we don't have direct supply chains, right? So we work with large suppliers, but we also work with collaborations of smallholder farmers. And the way that we do that is we build a real partnership with them. So we have partnerships to win. So what we do is, especially with the kind of the larger suppliers, we really work with them to create really an equal beneficial opportunity that we both have. So for example, in the United States, together with ADM and PepsiCo, we have worked together to really create a collaboration around how do we reduce the emissions on the field, implementation of regenerative agriculture, of course, use of less pesticides and fertilizers, changing the type of energy that's utilized, and really trying to do that from kind of a landscape level. So we, of course, only have a small land footprint, even though we're a large company with large brands. Our footprint's relatively small because a lot of the brands are condiments and mayonnaise, of course, some mini meals as well with Knorr and sides. But that footprint is relatively small. So we have to work together with the other off takers and with the supplier to really build that partnership so that all of us are really benefiting. But luckily for suppliers, a lot of these switches will reduce their actually on costs on the ground. So use of less fertilizers and pesticides, potentially use of less water, switching the electricity. Sometimes that can have a governmental benefit depending on where you are in the world. So those are what we really have to work on. So I think that the critical parts are really about having co-funding mechanisms in these efforts and also having real partnerships with the suppliers and also making sure that we're all benefiting from both the reporting side and also from the consumer side and also from the financial side.
Thanks, Dorothy. There's a really good question here that I'd actually like to stay with you, Dorothy, which is about protein. And it's about resolving the challenge of the huge protein demand and then comparing that with the lack of understanding of the role of plant protein. And how can we overcome the siloing we see of these categories where high protein and nutritionally dense options are often centered around chicken, as you said, and then plant-based being sort of seen as separate and a bit more of a niche category?
Well, I think there's some kind of switches that need to happen in relation to a couple different levers. So I think one lever is that protein coming from animals is becoming more expensive in some markets and in some places for a variety of reasons. But we have to make sure that, of course, the price point is either better or the same when it comes to an alternative on the protein side. So I think this is a big question. So when it comes to overarching the protein piece, from a dietitian perspective, to be honest, most of us actually don't need more protein. And the additional protein is simply going to turn to carbohydrates, which does the same thing as any other calories do. So that maybe can help all of you out there who are looking for many grams of protein, as much grams of protein as you can in every bite. The second piece is that the type of protein matters, and not all protein has all of the amino acids in it. So you need to make sure that you're actually having the right combination of foods. So the combination of foods also matters to make sure that you're getting the right amino acids in actually almost the same bite, or at least in the same day. So that means that you have to make sure that you have a wider variety of foods. So my main piece of takeaway actually from this would be that we eat so few foods right now. So about 75% of our calories come from very few crops. I think it's 12, changes all the time, and 5 animals. And that's very, very small. There are so many more species out there that we should be eating. So it's not really about going into these different kind of, vegan or, animal protein only or plant-based protein only or any of these spaces. In my view, it's really about getting a wider variety of foods altogether. That's where you're going to get the most benefits when it comes to energy, mood, well-being, so on and so forth. So if you're used to eating a lot of chicken, for example, I would recommend for a variety of reasons to eat some rice together with some beans or some quinoa or some other types of grains. So the best thing we can actually do for our health is to all become varietarians and to eat a wider variety of foods across the board. So that's the main critical piece, is understanding, one, we probably don't need so much protein. 2, the type of protein matters. And 3, a wider variety of foods is going to be much better for us and better for the planet. So if you are a conscious consumer, that's the number one thing in my view that you can do, is eat a wider variety of foods.
Thanks, Dorothy. So yeah, really striving for variety. I think that's a great piece. Caroline, I'd like to ask you a question before we close up. You spoke a lot about the sort of innovation that Oatly is seeing and, really, making the most of this exciting space. How are you excelling at striving for this balance that we've talked about with sort of consumer expectations without compromising the speed of innovation?
I don't see them as a kind of one or the other. I think they go completely hand in hand. And so for Oatly, as I said, we want to focus on products that are delicious, taste amazing, have great performance, are fortified with the nutrients we need, as I say, contain specifically the fiber, closing the fiber gap. As Dorothy said, the majority of us don't need more protein, but the majority of us actually do need much more fiber. and have a low climate impact, right? So we will continue to develop and expand our portfolio based on ticking all those boxes, and like developing obviously new flavors and things that are exciting for the TikTok generation. I don't see there being this kind of contradiction between how we innovate specifically from a product portfolio perspective and that. Though we do, of course, need to see innovation throughout our supply chains in terms of decarbonization. How do we actually scale regen more quickly? So we need to see innovation all the way down there. And I don't, again, see that as a kind of contradiction. And then I think we also need to think innovatively about changing behaviors, because we have systemic issues and we need to change. Like I mentioned already, we have like policy that is not supporting the kind of transition to us all eating planetary health diets. And I love your Dorothy, we should all be what did you call it? Variations or whatever. But I mean, I think that's great. But do we have the policy? Do we set up to support us? Do we have the food environments that support that? And here we need to really, I think, all lean into like what innovations can really support in this space. And I mean, I'm a not tech savvy, but I also think how do we also in the sustainability world specifically lean into using AI for good and really contribute to the handprint versus like kind of being a bit wary of AI from that has definitely a negative footprint. But so I think I'm thinking like I think innovation throughout where we see challenges in many parts of transforming our food system.
It's varietarian.
Varietarian. Thank you, Dorothy.
It doesn't quite roll off the tongue, but when it does, it does.
We're going to make it work. We're going to start using it all the time. We are at the top of the hour, and I just want to say thank you so much to the panel. It's been such an interesting conversation. I'd really love if you could all perhaps share the sort of insights and reports that you've been touching on. We could definitely share those with the network. I'd like to ask you for a very, very short key takeaway, a couple of words. It could be varietarian before we end. Alex, I'll turn to you first.
I guess I'll just reiterate what I said right at the very, very start. There's no average consumer when it comes to this. We have to design for those generational tensions. Gen Z has a voice, millennials, Gen Xers are pragmatic, and boomers have the wallet. Where those three overlap is where the opportunity lies for this.
Thanks, Alex. Caroline, you next.
Would you say radical optimism? We have the solutions. The majority of people want climate action and want to see a positive future. So we just all need to stand up and make it happen.
I love that. And as Alex said, your piece about sort of brands having, can really driving the change is very inspiring. So great note to end on. And finally, Dorothy, your key takeaway.
I would say that we need to think of consumers as conscious consumers. So we need to collectively really see that, the need and the desire for sustainability isn't actually in decline. It's actually shifting, and it's shifting to be a holistic way of seeing food, which those of us who have the opportunity to be in this space and have influence, it's a major opportunity for us right now. So I think from a positive piece coming from you, Caroline, I think, to have real optimism, if we do this, if we get this right, we could have a much more positive food future.
Perfect. So yeah, tapping into the conscious consumer. Well, thanks everyone, and thanks to the audience for your questions. It's been a really great conversation. We will be continuing this conversation at the Future of Food conference. Full details are on the Innovation Forum website. Caroline and Dorothy will also be there, and Alex's colleague Jamie will be joining. So we're looking forward to it. We hope to see you there. Thanks for joining, and have a good day.
Thank you. See you soon.